young woman, accused of being cursed for bearing daughters, was sentenced to death by the cruel verdict of her community. Her husband, Elijah, in fear and cowardice, betrayed her, abandoning her to superstition and human hatred. But at that very moment, Sheriff John Cameron, who decided to go against the entire settlement, took a step towards her. He held out his hand and said, "Come with me," and with that, he turned the tide of this dark story. Prepare to find out what a shocking twist this drama took, and why justice, in the end, prevailed. The snow crunched under Sheriff John Cameron's feet as he approached the secluded ranch where Elijah and his wife Evelyn lived. The wind howled, kicking up icy dust, and the sun, barely rising above the horizon, seemed incapable of providing warmth. John was here against his will. He held an order in his pocket, clutched like a hot coal. An order signed by Judge Harold Brooks, the most powerful man in the county. Tension hung in the air. The residents of this remote settlement in northern Maine believed in old omens. They were convinced that the birth of daughters, especially when only daughters were born, was a curse. They believed it was a sign of the earth's anger, foretelling bad harvests and harsh winters. And now, Evelyn had given birth to her third daughter. Elijah, her husband, was a simple, hardworking man who loved his girls, but could not resist the pressure of the community. His eyes, when they looked at his wife, were full not only of love, but also of fear. John saw Evelyn from a distance. She was kneeling in the snow. Her thin dress, meant for indoors, was stained with blood. Next to her lay her three daughters, still infants. John felt a surge of rage, burning his throat. It was so savage, so cruel, he could barely believe his eyes. His heart ached with fury at those who invented this barbaric ritual, at those who believed in it, and at those who didn't have the courage to stand against it. His anger wasn't just at Elijah, who seemed too weak to protect his family, but at himself for being forced to be part of this abomination. Evelyn, his voice came out hoarse, like shards of ice. He tried to take a step, but Elijah, standing behind his wife, raised a hand, stopping him. "Stop, Sheriff! Don't come any closer." John ignored him. He walked closer. Evelyn, shivering from cold and shock, raised her tear-filled, desperate eyes to him. They said I'm cursed," she whispered. "They said I doomed us all. That this is the only way to win back the earth's favor." The words that left her lips were even more savage than the sight before him. The women midwives who had delivered the babies should have helped Evelyn, but instead, they convinced Elijah that his wife was cursed. His rage grew with every second.
I ask you to like and subscribe to the channel, so you will help me in motivation to make such great stories for you, and I will see that you like them. Enjoy watching, everyone.
This so-called custom was nothing more than an excuse for those looking for a scapegoat. "That's not true," John said firmly, his gaze fixed on the three tiny bodies in the snow. "You are not cursed." He looked at Elijah. "Your wife isn't cursed. You, Elijah, are cursed. Cursed by your own cowardice." The sheriff's words pierced Elijah. His face was contorted. He looked at John, then at his wife and his children. In his eyes, a struggle between fear and a nascent sense of guilt was reflected. But it was too late. The consequences of his actions were already irreversible. John couldn't look at the scene any longer. He knew what he had to do, but he couldn't just leave. His duty as sheriff forced him to intervene, but his humanity demanded more. He knew he had to not only arrest Elijah, but also save Evelyn. "Come with me," he said, his voice now softer, but still firm. "I'll take you far away from here." Evelyn looked at him with distrust. "Where? Who am I to you? You're a victim, and I won't let you become the next one. I will protect you. Your husband let them do this, but I won't let them continue. Your husband didn't protect you, but I will." Elijah, hearing this, finally broke. He fell to his knees beside Evelyn, wrapping his arms around her. "Forgive me, Evelyn. Forgive me. I was weak." Evelyn didn't answer. She just looked at John, and in her eyes, full of pain, a spark of hope was born. She realized that this man was not a part of the cruelty she had faced. He was the one who had come to save her. It was incredible. The man she had known her entire life had betrayed her, while a stranger who had just appeared was ready to go against an entire community to protect her. John held out his hand to her, his gaze direct and resolute. "Come with me. I'll take you from here to a place where no one will touch you, and where you can start all over again." Evelyn still hesitated, but she felt she could trust him. For the first time in a long time, she felt that there was someone who would truly protect her. She didn't know where he would take her, but she knew she couldn't stay here. Not after everything that had happened. She slowly raised her hand and took his. Elijah watched this, his face distorted with pain and shame. He realized he had lost everything that was important to him. He had lost his family, his honor, and most importantly, his soul. John helped Evelyn to her feet. She could barely stand, her body exhausted and terrified. He took off his heavy greatcoat and draped it over her shoulders. It was too big for her, but it smelled of pine resin and sweat, the smell of reliability. "You're safe," he whispered, but it was more for himself than for her. He looked back at Elijah, who was still kneeling in the snow. "I'll be back for you later, Elijah. You know what you did, and you know you'll be punished for it." Elijah didn't answer. He just nodded. He knew. John led Evelyn to his horse. He helped her into the saddle. He sat behind her, holding her with one arm and the reins with the other. He glanced around at their surroundings. He felt the stares of curious neighbors who, hiding behind their windows, were watching them. Their eyes were full of contempt and judgment. But John didn't pay them any mind. He knew what he was doing, and he was ready to bear the responsibility for his actions. He knew that this moment had changed his life and Evelyn's life forever. He spurred the horse away from Elijah's ranch, leaving behind only tracks in the fresh snow and dark memories. The unknown awaited them, but in John's soul, a weak spark of hope was already kindling. He knew they had a long and difficult road ahead, but he was ready to walk it with Evelyn. "Come with me." His words now sounded not like a command, but like a promise. "Come with me. We will make it." And she believed him. She leaned against his back, feeling his warmth. She knew that she was no longer alone. John Cameron and Evelyn rode in silence. The cold wind bit at their faces, but Evelyn, wrapped in the sheriff's greatcoat, didn't seem to notice. Her mind was in a haze, and her heart ached with unbearable pain. She couldn't forget the sight of her children lying in the snow, tiny and defenseless, their blood a vivid red against the whiteness. The thought that her own neighbors, people she had known since childhood, could do such a thing was horrifying. And the most bitter part, her husband, Elijah, failed to protect her. John, feeling her tremble, tried to ride carefully. He didn't know where they were going, but he instinctively led the horse away from their settlement. He saw her pain and felt it as his own. John himself had once lost loved ones, and that experience allowed him to understand her suffering. He knew that what she needed now was not pity, but strength. "We'll reach my home soon," he said, trying to break the silence. "It'll be safe there, warm." Evelyn didn't reply. She just pressed herself closer to him, as if seeking salvation from the chilling reality in his warmth. She imagined her home, where just a few days ago there had been joy, where she had rocked her daughters to sleep, where she had dreamed of the future. Now, that home was a foreign place to her, a place full of betrayal and despair. Finally, they arrived at John's ranch. It stood at a distance from the other houses, surrounded by a dense forest and a high fence. It was a spacious and cozy place where order reigned, and the house had a pleasant smell of wood smoke. John helped Evelyn down from the horse. She could barely stand. Her strength was gone. He led her to the house, opened the door, and brought her inside. Inside, it was warm and bright. The fireplace was lit, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "Sit by the fire," John said, taking off his greatcoat from her. "I'll get you some warm tea." Evelyn, obeying, sank into a chair by the fireplace. The fire warmed her frozen body, but her soul remained icy. She looked at her hands, which still remembered the warmth of the tiny bodies. She couldn't believe her children were gone. She started to cry. First quietly, then louder, and then she was overcome by sobs. It was a cry full of despair, grief, and pain. A cry that burst from her chest, like a freed beast. John, returning with the tea, stopped in the doorway. He knew she had to go through this. He silently placed the cup on the table and stepped away, giving her space to grieve. He felt helpless, but he knew that no words now could ease her suffering. Evelyn cried for a long time, until her tears ran out. When she finally calmed down, her gaze fell on John. He was sitting in the corner, cleaning his rifle, but she could see that he was watching her. She felt that he understood her. Why? Her voice was weak. Why did they do this? I never did anything to anyone." John put down the rifle. Sometimes people look for a reason for their misfortunes. They look for someone to blame. And they choose the weakest ones. He looked at her with compassion. Sometimes the strongest people turn out to be the loneliest. Evelyn lowered her head. "Elijah, I don't understand. He loved them. He loved me." "Maybe," John said. But his fear was stronger. Fear of the community, of rumors, of what they would say about him. "But you. I'm the sheriff. I'm not afraid of rumors." Evelyn smiled through her tears. She felt that for the first time in her life, someone had protected her without fear of judgment. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew that with this man, she would be safe. She saw in him not just a sheriff, but a man who was willing to go against the whole world for the sake of justice. John stood up. "I have to go and arrest Elijah and those who were behind this." "No," Evelyn said quickly. "Don't leave me. I'm scared." John knelt down in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I won't leave you. I'll be back. I promise." He felt her hands tighten around his, and her fear transferred to him. He didn't want to leave her alone, but his duty called him. He was the sheriff, and he had to restore order. And he knew that if he didn't, this injustice would happen again and again. "I'll lock all the doors," he said. "You'll be safe. Just wait for me." Evelyn nodded. "Okay, I'll wait." He left, leaving Evelyn alone with her grief and fear. She sat by the fire, watching the flickering flames. She understood that John was risking a lot by going against the community. He was a stranger, a man who didn't live by their rules. And that made him even more dangerous in their eyes. She listened to the sounds of the night, the sound of the wind, the crackling of the fire, and suddenly, a knock on the door. Her heart beat wildly. "John," she whispered, but there was no answer. The knocking repeated, insistent. It wasn't John. He couldn't be back so soon. Evelyn was terrified. She didn't know who it was. She remembered John's words about locking all the doors. She ran to the window, carefully peeking through the curtains. She saw 3 silhouettes in the darkness. 3 women. The midwives who were at the birth of her daughters. The same ones who told Elijah she was cursed. She realized they had come for her. They weren't going to leave her alone. They wanted to finish what they had started. They wanted her to disappear forever. Her heart sank with horror. She knew they wouldn't stop. They believed in what they were doing. Evelyn backed away from the window. Her eyes fell on John's rifle, lying on the table. She picked it up. She had never held a weapon before, but now she realized she had no choice. She had to protect herself. She had to fight. The knocking on the door became even louder, and she heard voices, angry and full of hatred. They were shouting that she had to come out, that they had come for her to complete the purification. Evelyn realized that she would no longer be a victim. She would no longer kneel in the snow, waiting for her fate. She would fight. She would live. She would fight for her life, for the memory of her daughters, and for justice. The knocking on the door became unbearable. It drowned out all other sounds, turning into a roar that seemed to shake the house itself. Evelyn, with the rifle in her hands, felt the adrenaline pulsing through her veins. The fear hadn't completely receded yet, but it had given way to something new, a pure, wild determination. She was no longer a victim. She was a woman who they tried to break, but who found the strength to resist. She stood in front of the door, raising the rifle, but not shooting. She didn't want to kill. She just wanted to be left alone. The voices outside the door grew louder, full of hatred and fanaticism. Evelyn recognized them. They were the midwives who had delivered the babies and a few other women from the community. They were screaming that she was cursed, that her blood was defiling their land, that they had to complete the purification. Evelyn realized that they were acting not just out of superstition, but out of fear. They were so scared that they were willing to destroy an innocent person to feel safe. Suddenly, the banging stopped. A frightening silence fell, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the fireplace. Evelyn didn't lower the rifle. She knew it was a trap. She listened and heard a rustle. They were trying to get in through the window. She rushed into the next room, where there was another fireplace, and saw one of the women, her face distorted with hatred, trying to break the glass. Evelyn ran to the window, aimed the rifle at her, and screamed, "Go away! I don't want to hurt you!" The woman flinched, but her eyes still burned with madness. She picked up a rock from the ground and swung again, but at that moment, a shot rang out. Not from Evelyn's rifle, but from somewhere in the distance. The woman fell, and then her body began to twitch. The other women standing nearby shrieked and scattered. Evelyn didn't know what was happening. She ran to the window and saw John. He was standing in the distance, a rifle in his hands, looking at her. His eyes were full of rage. He knew they had come for her. He knew they wouldn't stop. He didn't wait for them to kill her. He fired into the ground next to one of them, but she, startled, fell and hit her head on a rock. John had not intended to kill anyone. He just wanted to scare them. But apparently, she was too close to the edge. John approached the house. His face was pale with anger. He opened the door and came inside. "Evelyn," he said, "are you okay?" She nodded. Her hands were shaking, and she could barely hold the rifle. John walked up to her, gently took it from her, and put it in the corner. "You were ready to defend yourself," he said, looking at her with admiration. "I knew you were a strong woman." Evelyn felt the tension that had held her all this time begin to recede. She was safe. John had come back. But he hadn't come alone. Behind him stood several men. They were dressed in rough clothing. Their faces were grim, but their eyes showed compassion. John turned to them and said, "This is Evelyn. Her husband and the community wanted to kill her. She is not cursed. She is a victim, and she will live here under my protection." One of the men, tall and thin with a gray beard, walked up to Evelyn and held out his hand. "My name is Isaac," he said. "I'm glad you're safe. We heard what happened, and we want to help you." Evelyn looked at John. He nodded. "Isaac is my friend. He and his people don't believe in these superstitions. They'll help us." Isaac and the other men were farmers and ranchers who lived on the border of their settlement. They had long heard about the strange traditions, but had not intervened. However, when they learned what had happened, they could no longer stand by. They were ready to go against their own community to protect an innocent woman. "We won't let them harm you," Isaac said. "They already came for you, but we won't let them get close to John's ranch." Evelyn felt her heart fill with hope. She was not alone. She had found new friends who were ready to fight for her. For the first time in a long time, she felt not just like a victim, but like a person worth fighting for. Meanwhile, John had arrested Elijah and several other men who were involved in this terrible crime. He didn't judge them himself. He sent them to the nearest town, where a real court awaited them. He knew they wouldn't escape punishment. He knew that justice would prevail. From that day on, life on John's ranch changed. Evelyn stayed with him. She learned to live again. She learned to trust. She learned to love. She learned to be happy. She helped John with the chores, cooked food, and cared for the animals. She was a good homemaker, and John appreciated that. They spent a lot of time together, talking, sharing their thoughts, dreams, and fears. They grew closer and closer, and their relationship grew into something more than just friendship. Isaac and his people became frequent guests at the ranch. They helped John with the chores, shared news, and sometimes just sat by the fire, talking. They had become a family. One spring, when the snow began to melt and the first buds appeared on the trees, John and Evelyn were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. Evelyn, no longer the trembling, frightened woman she once was, but a strong and confident one, rested her head on his shoulder. "I never thought I could be happy again," she whispered. John hugged her. "Happiness is what we create ourselves, and we'll create it together. I didn't just save you, Evelyn. You saved me. You gave me back my faith in people. You gave me back hope." Evelyn raised her head and looked into his eyes. She saw in them not just love, but something deeper, something that went beyond words. She saw herself in them strong, brave, capable of loving and forgiving. "Come with me," he said, his voice soft and gentle. "Come with me. We'll make it." And she knew he was right. She knew they would make it. They had already made it. The winter finally receded, giving way to a warm, life-giving spring. John's ranch bloomed along with new hopes. Evelyn, no longer the woman she was, but a strong and confident one, looked at the world with different eyes. She was not just a survivor, she was reborn. With the help of John, Isaac, and other neighbors who had left their superstitious settlement and settled nearby, she found a new place in the world where she was valued not for what she could give, but for who she was. The trial of Elijah and those who participated in the ritual was relentless. Judge Brooks, known for his strict but fair reputation, handed down a verdict that shocked the entire county. Elijah and several other men who were behind it were sentenced to hard labor. The women who were involved were publicly condemned and sent to a mental asylum. Justice had prevailed. But the story didn't end there. The news of what John had done spread throughout the state. People who lived in fear began to turn to him for help. They believed that he was the one who could protect them from superstition and cruelty. John, with the help of Evelyn and his new friends, became not just a sheriff, but a protector. One day, as John and Evelyn were sitting by the fireplace, a pregnant woman came to them. She was young, scared. Her husband had left her because she had already given birth to 2 daughters, and he was afraid the third would be the same. She came to them for help. She had heard that John and Evelyn helped women like her. Evelyn took her hands in hers. "You have nothing to fear," she said with tenderness. "We won't abandon you. We'll help you. Your daughters are not a curse, but a blessing." Evelyn, who was once a victim, had now become a protector. She, along with other women who had gone through a similar ordeal, created a sanctuary for pregnant women. A place where they could feel safe, where they could give birth in peace and quiet, where their children would be protected. John, seeing this, was proud of his Evelyn. She was not just his wife, but his inspiration. She was the light that illuminated the path for others. One day, as Evelyn and John were walking through town, they saw a woman who had once been one of the midwives. She was sitting on a bench, alone, her gaze empty. She had lost everything: her home, her family, her reputation. She was a living reminder of what had happened. Evelyn stopped and walked up to her. The woman flinched and looked up at her. Her eyes were full of fear and shame. "Evelyn," she whispered, "forgive me. I was blind." Evelyn smiled. "I forgive you," she said, "and I believe you can start all over again. If you want to." The woman started to cry. They were tears not of grief, but of relief. She realized that Evelyn held no grudge against her. She realized that she still had a chance. Justice had prevailed. Evil had been punished. But the most important thing was that Evelyn and John, despite everything they had been through, found the strength to love, to forgive, and to help others. They became a symbol of hope and inspiration for everyone. They showed that even in the darkest place, a light can shine through, if you believe in it. They were not just heroes. They were catalysts for change. They changed the world around them, making it kinder, more just, and brighter. And their story will live on forever, inspiring others to fight for truth, for good, and for love.